A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes, as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us yet. That point is through chapter 24 of Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Crossland, today I am in a very odd mood. I don't know what was up with me reading that intro, but I just got done with it. I'm like, yep, that's done. And I'm like, oh no, we have to do the rest of the episode now. I should probably continue from there.
You're in an odd mood. I'm in an odd mood as well. It's a good mood. I feel a little hyperactive today, but we're rolling through it. We're continuing. We're vibing. We're interacting with the universe still. So today, you can tell this is going really well. So today is our 6th episode discussing Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 20 through 24. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're drinking. PJ, what are you having today?
I've got a Monte Carlo, kinda. I made a couple tweaks to it. So it calls for rye. In my infinite drinking, drink all my rye. So I've got 3 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of Benedictine, 2 dashes of Peychaud's bitters. And the recipe I saw called for shaking it, and I don't quite understand why. I figured this is one that could be stirred pretty easily. If anybody has a reason why this would be shaken instead, or if you know, Crossland, let me know. But I figured it would work well enough to stir it and then garnished it with a cocktail cherry. I don't know enough about Benedictine to know if there's anything that happens with agitation with it. I doubt it. I don't know.
That feels more like a preference thing.
That's fair.
To me, I've seen a couple of odd things actually lately when I've been perusing some cocktail instructions, and one such is expressing bitters, basically taking a syrup and bitters and mashing those together first.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'm like, I wonder if there's a real reason to do that. And I have not discovered if there is or is not. So Did I do that today in my cocktail? Absolutely. I followed the instructions. But I was I feel like a madman for doing this. So
good deal.
That would be the only reason that I could think shaken versus stirred. But
that's fair. Yeah, a little bit of,
I guess.
Maybe that's fair. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, right. Maybe. That's exactly how I feel about it too. How's it taste?
It's good. It's definitely bourbon forward.
3 ounces of bourbon. It's quite a bit.
It's good, though. I really like it. I don't have hardly any experience with Benedictine. I have this little bottle of it that I've had for, over a year now. I think I bought it towards the beginning of starting this show with you, and I've used it twice. So let me take another little sippy poo. So it's sweeter than I would have expected it to be. There's not a whole lot of extra flavor beyond the bourbon and the Peychaud's that I'm picking up on. I'm sure it's there. I just don't know what I'm looking for. But I didn't realize how sweet Benedictine was. But it makes sense that this recipe doesn't call for any sort of simple or anything like that. So anyway, I am following that up with a 2014 Old Guardian from Stone, which is their barley wine ale. So cracking back into those cellar beers I've got. So we'll see how that held up after 8 years in the bottle now. Almost.
Wow. Jeez. Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yep. What about you? What are you sipping on today?
I am having a recommendation from one of our patrons, voted on and recommended inside of the Patreon. Sophandrius the Howler recommended a cold brew old-fashioned, and I found one online that was dubbed the cold-fashioned, so we're running with that.
That's a good name.
Yeah, I liked it. I was like, okay, cool, this is legit. So 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce cold brew concentrate, this note is very important, 1 ounce simple syrup, 2 dashes of bitters, and orange peel. I went to the grocery store across from me beforehand, going on our start time and whatnot. And I was like, oh, shoot, I got to pick up the cold brew, of course, for the drink. I grabbed standard cold brew as opposed to cold brew concentrate. And so I think it's a little bit weaker than it should be, but it's still good. It's just not quite. I can imagine this cocktail being a little bit more bitter than it is. And
would it be more bitter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, cold brew concentrate is very bitter.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, that's fair.
That said, I've drank cold brew concentrate straight. So
have I.
I'm just saying, like, it's, that said, it's still tasty, but it is a bitter flavor profile. Like coffee in general. I mean, coffee is a bitter profile.
It's not more bitter than, like, a strong coffee, I guess that's where I'm coming from. Maybe slightly. Really
depends on the concentrate.
Okay. The ones I've had haven't been.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, like chameleon concentrate, not overly bitter. Any like trade coffee concentrate, going to be bitter, going to be that forward because they're expecting you to either use water or milk to water it down into the drink of your choice.
Gotcha.
So per kind of like standard coffee
or
stuff.
Coffee.
I worked for those who don't know, I worked for a coffee company for like a year and changed from like liking coffee and enjoying coffee to being a total coffee snob. And I love it. I love that about myself, but at the same time, I'm recognizing I'm like, no, it's bitter. And I'm like, oh shit, shut up. You don't need to be that way.
Crossland says this like it means something, but Crossland was a custodian at a Starbucks within a mall.
No, I worked for a third wave coffee startup and went to a holy fuck ton of coffee shops and tried a holy fuck ton of coffee brewed in a bunch of different ways. But Jesus, it was wild. What a time. I could do a whole podcast on that job. Anyway, well, an episode at the very least. So to the point, though, this cocktail is good. I'd probably double the regular cold brew if you're using that versus concentrate, although I don't think it perfectly compensates. And if you're using cold brew, make sure it, like, not the concentrate, make sure it's the unsweetened, because this could very easily go over on sweet. This is already kind of towing that edge a little bit. So
gotcha.
That's why I think it needs a little bit more bitter, or like, I put an orange peel in. It almost could use some other citrus, but I don't know what would work well with coffee. So I didn't want to push it.
Other than orange, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's where I was at too. And I was like, I don't want to add just straight orange to this. That seems a little bold. So I decided just to ride with it, and maybe I'll experiment next time.
Did you use orange bitters?
I didn't. I do have orange bitters, but I used Angostura.
I wonder if that'd be something that you could do to that to get a little bit more citrus into it.
Yeah, that could work. It just needs a slightly more refined profile, which I think you'd get from using the concentrate, to be honest. I feel like that's just the mistake. And now it's trying to adjust for that mistake, but it's still good. And I will definitely I think I will probably try to do this again next week, or maybe in a bonus episode, to refine it to some degree with concentrate, or practice, kind of in between. We'll figure it out.
I like how within that sentence you said, I think, definitely, and probably all at the same time.
This is why I'm so glad that we have Descript to fucking clean up my bullshit. To that degree, I am following up with New Anthem's Trying Not to Sweat. It's a Simcoe Centennial IPA. It is fucking delicious. It is just clean deliciousness. I don't know how else to even approach this. This is one of my favorite beers that I've had in a while. Yeah, it is perfect. I would hazard this is a 9 out of 10.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it's super good. I was kind of blown away when I opened it. I grabbed it on a whim. I know that New Anthem makes good stuff. They make consistent IPAs. They make a lot of them in different varietals. This is like so good. So yeah, that's what I'm following that up with. Okay, cool. So generally we would go into last week's predictions, but we have no predictions to answer from the previous weeks, week over week. So we don't have any to talk about, but we are now collecting them appropriately, which is good. Yes, quite. They take up a lot of space. This is one of our longest documents. So
it's a very long document.
It's a 10-pager, and I didn't even put some of the quotes in here. With that, let's get into our chapters. With that, we start off with chapter 20. I really think that this chapter is brimming with reflection right off the bat. We see another quick passage of time. A couple of weeks have gone by since last time we were with Vin, but the way that Vin has spent her time further ingratiating herself inside of the noble community is very well summarized. But we also feel her kind of earnestness here with being held back from using her Mistborn capabilities and the way that she kind of feels like she's being squelched in a way. What'd you make of Vin's reflection here?
This girl is coming off a very serious injury that really should have killed her, based on what we know about her. She obviously had the pewter, just innately able to stop that from happening. But this was a mortal wound, more or less. And she needs that time to recover, but also this is going to be a huge benefit, even within this chapter, we know, for example, but going forward, of her being able to really refine her skills as a noblewoman and focusing on that appearance and the social sort of situations that she's put herself into, or that she's been put into, not that she's put herself into. So all in all, I think this is very good for her, even though it sucks that she has to kind of sit still for a little while from her perspective.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it feels like PJ, you're making such a grown-up assumption here for Vin. I love that. Your fatherly instinct that you totally have coming through.
I'm going to be real. I'm thinking about a lot about it from the perspective of my dog that just got neutered today. We have to get him to stay still for like 2 weeks. So, that's what I'm channeling.
Fair enough. That fits. It's not good for you to run around. I know you want to, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
He's got all these staples and shit. Like our other dog didn't have these like complications and problems, but this dog, his balls never dropped, so they had to like cut him open and really get in there to get him disarmed, I guess. So anyway,
with that information, I'm going to have to move on for my own sanity. Beyond that, she reflects on her becoming a noblewoman and beginning to like her persona as Valette, as opposed to just kind of acting in it. And this is something we see a couple of times over the course of this week's reading. It's really an interesting change for her, I think, to come to this realization that she could like who she is, which is a thing. She's also offended, of course, with the idea that Shan insults her, among other things, and this is kind of what sets her off thinking down that path.
So I'm going to use this as a platform to talk about human nature. And I think what we should be taking away from this passage is that people are naturally stuffy, pretentious douchebags. And I'm not sure why we shun that within our society. It should be embraced because that's what naturally people are destined to be. Right.
I feel like you're setting up a long pitch on how you feel about the rest of the content that we're going to be talking about this week. So,
nah.
No, that couldn't be it.
But I think what it does show is that people are very adaptive, and people, when thrust into a position, can chameleon their way into that position and embrace it. So it's cool to see. Scary.
Yeah,
cool.
I think it is cool. It's unfortunate, of course, that she kind of feels this, I don't know, like she feels this other, that she feels like it's a segregated part of her and she doesn't feel like she can just, and she is play acting, right? Like she is, it's so weird. Is it real confidence? Is it a lack of or is it, how do we measure this? I realize that I'm stumbling through and half starting the sentence every time, but it really is a difficult thing to parse. Like, how do we think about this side of her persona?
I don't know if we think of it as a distinct side yet. I don't think it's a separate personality. I think it's a character still. But
okay.
Much like method acting, she is getting very involved in that persona, in that character.
Sure. I just also think that her own up-and-coming self-confidence seems to accompany the arrival of this character, right? And so that's an interesting, she's kind of faking it till she's making it, and faking it is also helping the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think
she's becoming more trusting, but
she's taking on the character of this very confident noblewoman, and she's learning that she can be confident and she can be outgoing And she's just kind of applying that to her own life, taking what comes naturally to her into her own actual personality. Like faking it till you're making it. That's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That seems to make the most sense to me. I agree. So we landed somewhere in the middle.
Did we land anywhere?
We don't need to land. I'm not saying that like we need to fully settle, but we kind of have an idea at the very least.
Right.
Yeah. We're not at the end yet, so we can't like really settle anything until we have all of the information, right? But so just a little bit of speculation. So there's a reflection as the Pac-Men are loading and sharing a private conversation about Kelsier and how his legend has grown to almost supersede that of the rebellion. And my question for you is, do you think Kelsier is a good choice for a ruler? What do you make of their conversation about Kelsier?
I don't know if he's a great pick for leader. He just seems way too well suited for being on the streets rather than like pulling the strings from a boardroom. He's great at being a puppet master, but he's not great at what makes him great about that is being able to be there and move around and be shifty. And that's not the same sort of skill set you need to be able to pull the strings of a nation. But I don't know if there's a better candidate for rallying the people. He is charismatic and has a myth around him already. So as far as that goes, he's the one that has the best shot at actually rallying people behind him to start some sort of movement. It's just, that doesn't mean he's going to be good at leading them. He's a great leader of this like small crew that all trust each other and basically act as equals, even though he's technically their leader. But I don't think he'd be good as somebody actually making decisions for an entire populace. Yeah,
and I think that makes sense, and that I think that you've got a good perspective here. This, of course, is a prediction that I'm setting up here for you as well. So yeah. I think that's
a tough one to like boil down to a concise prediction. But
well, I think you're basically saying that I don't think he makes a great pick for a leader, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Leader of the movement as opposed to leader after the movement, I think, are two separate things.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. 100%. Definitely understand where you're going for with that one. So, at Kelsier's suggestion, we also get a moment between Marsh and Vin, wherein he's training her in the use of bronze. I really like how he gets specific in the theory of allomancy here and the ability to differentiate the powers she's seeing and experiencing through bronze. The distinguished pulses allow for us to understand the description of metals better in the future. So I really think that this is sort of a genius seed that's being planted here, because this is a mostly like you and I don't have great analogs without this information for what she's experiencing. And this gives us an analog.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally fair. I loved the way all of these in-depth explanations of the metal, like the allomancies, like the specific allomancies. I love the way they're described every time. So I'm super pumped about it. I think the fact that we get more in-depth understanding of bronze is super cool, because it, like Kelsier seems to think, and as Marsh put it, a lot of Mistborn seem to think it's just kind of one to be glossed over. But I think this gives us more in-depth perspective of how truly unique and impressive Vin is, based on how naturally this comes to her. So, I don't know. Cool scene. Very cool scene. I like the magic. I like the way magic is described here. You knew that to begin with. Like, you knew I would like this, so I appreciate it.
Well, I did have this idea that you would like this, and I'm glad that you'd appreciate each of these. You know, it's fun that you predicted kind of early on that we were going to get the one skill at a time breakdown. And I think that we're at a point here, we've seen most all of the skills, I think, by the end of this week with their various presenters. I can't think of any we're missing from anyone.
Did we get anything really in-depth with copper?
Copper. No, I don't think so. So maybe
I don't think so either. Because that's something I actually posited on Twitter, and I never got a response. Nobody responded to it. Because I'm assuming
no
maybe
one wants
there's
to tell you the answers.
Yeah. But to me, it seems like nobody would be able to tell that they're a copper user as like a ska misting. Like, there doesn't seem to be any external feedback to the use of copper. So that's what I'm just kind of playing with in my head right now. And I'm sure things either do or don't come later. So you don't have to like pretend that, oh, that's interesting, let's leave it at that. We can just move on. I get it.
All that I was trying to get to is that I think you predicted all of these moments kind of early on, and it's nice that we get them kind of piecemealed out. And I think often stories don't provide as much depth, even if there are these like training moments. And this, I think, is a great, like, this could be an info dump, right? But it doesn't feel like an info dump in the way that it's presented. And I don't know why that is, because if you just strictly took this out of context, it should feel like an info dump. But I don't know if it's how he wraps it, like with like the beats around Marsh and Kelsier in their relationship, the sibling dynamic relationship. And maybe if that's part of the reason that this doesn't feel info dumpy, or that these don't, but it's interesting. They're always shrouded in some kind of action.
I think it's because Vin is simultaneously a very important main character of this story, and also, to a certain extent, the stand-in for the audience. It's not just one or the other. So we get these very important character beats on top of this info dump for the audience that makes sense for her character as well, and it's just masterfully like blended into itself. And I think that's why it doesn't feel oppressive with the amount of information they're dropping. It feels natural because she has to learn this, and she's interested in learning it, so that we get it from the perspective of somebody who's eager to learn, while also she's interested in the person that's teaching her it. Like, it's just super well done. It's a lot of different perspectives that are overlapping into a single character. Yeah.
And it is wondrous. I do really appreciate
it's impressive, man. Like, it's super impressive.
I mean, I guess part of this is too that, you know, you don't have wide experience with novels or novellas and the like. I'm just saying.
Are you claiming to me that I don't read much?
I'm claiming historically that you might also not know what bad writing looks like. I'm going a step further.
I've written stuff before, so I know what bad writing looks like.
That'll do. That'll do it, right? Yeah, I feel you. To the point that we were talking about a little bit here with Marsh and Kelsier and their relationship, I think that the conversation is a really great one upon Vince kind of prompting, because she's trying to dig at that relationship, kind of like she was earlier between her and Kelsier when she was thinking about Reen and kind of that. What do you think about Marsh's reflection on his relationship with Kelsier?
I think truly, especially given the scope, looking at it through the lens of Vin and Reen, having that sort of side-by-side view, Kelsier and Marsh's relationship seems really kind of standard and relatable in comparison. They're not super close, but they don't hate each other. They do love each other to a certain extent, but they're not super touchy-feely, close family bonding kind of deal. They argue, they bicker, they don't see eye to eye, but it's like what family doesn't have a certain air of that to it. Some more than others, but I feel like it's at the very least relatable, if not straight up normal. Maybe a little bit more complicated hardships and trauma than a lot of families, but you know, their actual interpersonal relationships don't seem that far out of like normality compared to Vin and Reen's, which is entirely just dripping with abuse and problems. So yeah, sorry.
No, I agree with you. I think that you're right. It is kind of a more normal relationship, and it does seem it's very interesting. Like the Marsh that we're presented with here, right? Iron Eyes and whatnot, his nickname, and kind of, I can see how you were the leader, and, you know, comparing, he's like, yeah, I definitely killed people, but with purpose. And he's like, I guess Kelsier actually has changed. And it feels like a better relationship than the one between Vin and Reen. But it also makes you wish, in the same way that she does, that she could have that relationship, like how much better they would have been together if they would have worked together, as opposed to him feeling the need to teach those lessons. It's just it hurts for her.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you throw in, right after that, you throw in this whole scene about Vin's childhood with her mad mother. And it's really haunting, dude.
Yeah. God, haunting is true.
Messy, violent. This is one of those moments in Branderson's writing that I really appreciate how kind of spare it is, but that at the same time, I almost wish for a little bit more. Like, my brain fills in the details pretty well, and I can imagine if this were adapted, how this scene would expand fairly easily as we're flashing back on the childhood of Vin. But this is a moment where you visualize this single paragraph of like violence, and it could take up many pages in theory.
It could. And because it doesn't, I assumed that there will be more in the future. Mm-hmm. And the more in the future might not entirely line up with the version of events that Reen has cemented into Vin's mind. Like, not necessarily, like, I think it's probably pretty true and pretty clear that her mother was mad, and maybe true that her mother murdered her kid sister, baby sister. But there was something to that paragraph that made me like think this isn't a true memory of Vince, and this is entirely relying on reports from Reen as she was growing up about what had happened and how she was rescued.
Yeah, there definitely is a sentence in there that kind of portrays this as maybe with like a question mark around it a little bit. The detail of the earring as well, this being like the earring, it kind of makes you question like why Vin hangs on to the earring if it's this horrific memory, but maybe it's because it's her attachment to her mom that she knows nothing about really. You know, to your point, she doesn't even fully remember this. I like the fact that you use the word cemented in her mind, like Reen cemented this in her head. I think that makes a lot of sense as to how to describe it.
Right. So, yeah. I don't know. I'm hopeful that we'll go back to this event in more detail, maybe from a different perspective of somebody else that might remember it, somebody else that might have knowledge of it that wasn't Reen. I don't know. That's my only thought as to why it'd be so sparse here, other than her not wanting to share more, but it didn't seem like she didn't want to share because we're in her head here. It wasn't like I hold back and only tell him what he needs to know in order to make a connection. It's like she's being sparse because that's the information she has.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. I just can't wait for more there. But like her relationship, to your point, like it seems fraught, and that seems like just an awful circumstance. With that, we move into chapter 21. We start off here, of course, with the little logbook entry, as it's referred to now, as opposed to journal, so we can call it the logbook. But the hero of ages shall not be a man, but a force. No nation may claim him, no woman shall keep him, and no king may slay him. He shall belong to none, not even himself. And I think that this is interesting in its own right, but to follow that up right afterwards, we begin to see further words from the Lord Ruler's logbook, as it's called, to follow this that Kelsier is reading. Given the context we've received since reading the beginning of the story, what do you make of both this new little section that we get and the section that we see repeated here that we read, scattered across chapters?
So, this is part of the prophecy, right, that the Lord Ruler fulfilled, supposedly.
Yeah, the hero of ages.
Yeah.
Thing.
And this passage, is it this passage?
Keep in mind that right here, there's that whole section on 342. There's that whole section right underneath that has other components in it.
Right. I think I'm confusing myself.
Which is kind of about the prophecy.
Yeah, there's a point at some point, like, I can't remember if it's right here or if it's later on in this section that we're reading, that Kelsier talks about how he never thought about the Lord Ruler being mortal until, like, reading this logbook. Was that here or was that later?
That is right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
To Kelsier, the Lord Ruler was less a man and more a creature, but this was fascinating because yet the person presented in the logbook seemed all too mortal. He questioned and pondered. He seemed like a man of depth and even character.
Yeah, it's fun to have our characters looking at this from the same perspective we are now, you know?
Yeah.
I like how this blends into itself. Self-referential to a certain extent.
Now we know that they have the information that we have. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's like reverse dramatic irony.
Okay, so I have to ask you now, because we have very obvious, tangible proof that these passages are from the book that they now have, which this is the first time, like, this is the first contextual confirmation of what we're looking at, correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
When did you come to that realization?
The assumption?
The assumption, yeah. Was it before or after me? Because you know when I did.
I feel like I had ideas around... So immediately upon like reading it, I was like, okay, this is really interesting. This is an interesting story angle. And I feel like I probably like mostly thought I nailed it around like chapter 7, chapter 8. If that makes sense, like
okay.
our third episode equivalent. And I think you got it on the 4th or between the 3rd and 4th. So pretty close. I don't feel like I was that far ahead. It is meant to be a question, and it lends itself to the question of like, is this written in the future? Is this written in the past? And then you start to get more solid clues that it's written in the past around that, like chapter 9, 10, 11 point. You can't really like fully put it together quite yet.
Right. Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. No, so
I was just curious what you thought of it.
I think you're on it. Let's just put it this way. You had some sort of like vague idea that I think you referenced in like episode 1 or 2 when you're just like running through, you're like, blah, it could be this. And the no PJ zone went off like a dinging bell. Like, how the fuck did PJ make an assumption? It's like, and someone else said, he's not going to remember that.
I don't. What I remember is assuming it was Vin. I was assuming we were meant to think it was Kelsier, but I assumed it was Vin. And a big part of that was the audiobook and the voice used.
You're sold on the narrator's voice.
Yep, I was.
Yeah.
So
never trust a voice actor. That's all I'm saying.
No, they're all bullshit.
Just making shit up as they go along. Just kidding. So yeah, I like the mortal reflection that you make there in terms of, you know, kind of on Kelsier's part and kind of the conflict that he has internally.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting to see the juxtaposition. This is something that Kelsier kind of ruminates on as well, but the juxtaposition of the Lord Ruler before Ascension and after. No, like we see him in this logbook as this character, this person of whom doesn't seem cruel from the text. He seems to be a good person, which, you know, I said Kelsier kind of lends credence to, but clearly that's not where he is today.
Yeah, definitely. There's clearly a difference. Very clearly. So my question, I guess, is, was there some sort of corruption or possession? Is he like a conduit for something more and like his body is being used for something? Or is it more mortal than that and this is how he always was, and this sort of power and influence is allowing that sort of side of him to emerge more and he's allowed to express it more? I don't know. It's really interesting, and I wish we had more than paragraph at a time with this dude.
Too bad. I'm just kidding. We obviously have more passages to go. You know, if we consider the fact that each chapter has one, we've got a decent amount of time left with the Lord Ruler before.
I feel like we're going to get, by the end of the book, no, we're not, but by the end of the series, we're going to get a point of view from the Lord Ruler, and we're going to see him wake up, be groggy, get his morning coffee, take his daily shit. Like, we're going to see the nitty gritty in the shit room. He's going to read his little book about what he did in his past life. Until you made that post, I completely forgot about the shit room thing.
Oh my God. You said it so many times. I had to edit it because it was said so many times. I was just like, okay, a couple of poop jokes. This is 4 times now, and I had to just keep cutting it back.
Poop room.
Poopin' room. I kept all the poopin' rooms once. I was like, that's the good one. That's the one to keep. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting observation to say that we'll get a Lord Ruler perspective. And I really appreciate the idea of it also being like just his normal day. His wake up, make the coffee, go to the poopin' room, enslave a bunch of people.
Do you think he drinks his coffee in the poopin' room?
Probably. Don't you?
Probably.
It's a direct to poop pipeline. All right, we've talked way too much about shit on the show lately. The only thing that could be more direct would be like a Chipotle burrito on the toilet or Taco Bell.
I think Taco Bell's the one.
Yeah, all right. Holy shit. Okay. So
Holy
we then
shit?
Meet up with
what?
We
Lord
are then
Ruler
traveling I hate you. We're then traveling by canal, which can I just say, like, also canals as a function of like travel in this story is super unique. Like the fact that we're not just on a road with a bunch of horses and like carriages and whatnot, instead using canals to like move everything around. Like that's also a strangely unique angle.
It is. It's like Venice and the Rocky Mountains.
We then meet up with the army, Captain Demew, as well as General Hammond, of which I love that they call him Hammond, because Hammond makes me giggle each time, even though it's a nice formal name. I like Ham so much that I can't not. And we get also more time with Yeadon as well, while inspecting the army in the north, but we also get a reflection on the pits of Hathsin as Kelsier climbs down the crack into the caves below and what Kelsier had to do to survive the pits themselves, namely fetching a geode a day, his arms being scarred and scraped as he went in and out. And
I don't remember if this was an official guess. I think it was.
I think it was
an official guess, so I think I get to drink for the fact that I guessed that there was a methodical torture behind his scars, and he just kind of rolled around in the dirt a bunch.
Wait a second. Let's clarify. I think that this is kind of a methodical torture before you go ahead and take a drink.
No, I agree. This is a torture. This is a methodical torture, but this is not methodically, intentionally placing scars upon his body.
Yes. Okay. All right.
I was under the thought that he was in a chair and they were like very intentionally cutting him with very fine scalpels and tools.
Gotcha. Isn't it interesting that we get this kind of context over the course of the chapter, but the dissenters, those that need to be jailed or thrown away, are basically also the only ones mining the only ATM mine in the entire world?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you'd think maybe it's just that rare. It's just so rare to have any sort of Mistborn in general that it'd be so incredibly rare to have a Mistborn dormant, like an unbroken, unsnapped Mistborn that was also a dissenter. That like it's just the perfect storm, essentially.
The confluence, yeah.
So, yeah, it's fucking incredible. Anyway, did we have a question that was posed?
We were just talking about the pits.
We did. We were just talking about the pits. I still haven't drinking yet for my improper guess from like basically episode 1 or 2, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's 1 or 2 for sure. But we were talking about the caves and the cracks and kind of crawling down into that.
So at the recommendation of Tolson, our Linux Greybeard webmaster, I very quickly binge watched all of Ghost Town Living. So I've been thinking a lot about mining and like crawling around in mines lately. And that shit was hard when it wasn't intended to be torture. So this is fucking brutal. These descriptions are horrifying.
Yeah, it is a brutal thing to see. After inspecting the entrances, of course, which I think are really interesting too, the cracks in the ground that they have to crawl through, as opposed to like general cave entrances. Like they're just cracks and you have to like crawl down into them and kind of maneuver your way through. Is very interesting. But after they make it down, Kelsier has a number of different like very PTSD like reactions as he's walking around, but he ultimately discusses with Ham the goal of the visit, which is not just to inspect the army, but to hand off the reins of the army to Yeadon, to have him be in charge of the sort of revolution and rebels that, he should be leading for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, what was interesting to me at this point was hearing kind of the reluctance from Ham to pass on the reins. He gained this sort of personal sense of responsibility over the position, and he knew well, he well knew the whole point, but I don't know, got invested. And that was kind of cool. And that makes total sense from his character, because we jump into like philosophical points pretty quickly from there. Like he is definitely a thinker, and definitely somebody who reads into situations for the better. And for that reason, definitely got invested in his men, in his people, in the people that he was temporarily kind of leading. So, I don't know. I thought it was cool.
Yeah. It feels very cool, and it gives him a little bit more agency, especially since Eden has been, a good character that's been warming up to us over the course of time, but he hasn't really had the spotlight outside of his place inside of the rebellion.
Ham, you mean?
Well, I was talking about Yeden being like handed the reins, but I understand as well your reflection on Ham. Sorry. I said he, and I was talking about Yeden in addition to your reflection on Ham. I think that it is interesting to feel like he feels responsible, and we get a little bit more about the kind of the interesting dynamic that Ham feels relating to people a little bit at the end of this week's reading, when he's talking about the garrison, like he can't fake anything. He is himself. So he doesn't yield another persona. He doesn't pretend. He just is himself everywhere he goes. And so he kind of carries that personality. He's not hiding anything, which is fascinating. It also makes him super relatable and a very honest character. Kelsier even goes so far as to say that he can only trust Ham and Breeze out of the crew. Which, that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Really, he says really trust.
Which, to me, there's a couple of very curious people left out from that. And that's Dachshund for one, but more importantly to our conversation from last week is,
Marsh clubs.
No. Why am I fucking blanking on this right now? Sazed.
Oh, Sazed, yeah.
Is Sazed technically part of this crew that he's talking about? Or does he not technically fully trust Sazed?
That's interesting. I wonder, I don't know if Sazed counts as a part of the crew who really is a part of the plan, in full. Sazed's more of an attaché to Vin, if that makes sense. It seems, currently, Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So, I think he trusts him, but that also leaves the interesting question about Renew, right?
We did leave out Renew, but Renew seems to have some sort of supernatural background that maybe precludes him from that sort of...
Sure. Maybe we don't need to worry about him because he's magic.
Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that idea. We get even more pit details here about the PTSD that Kelsier experienced around how Kelsier had snapped breaking when Mara gave him a geode when she claimed to have two. And that's just a massive pain because in many ways, Kelsier wasn't supposed to live because, and she ultimately chooses to sacrifice herself for him. And it's just, there's an interesting component there. I just wanted to reach in and feel your feels and your thoughts.
Well, reach away and feel my feels. That fucking sucks, man. But I'm curious if that's why he doesn't hold any sort of animosity towards her as far as the betrayal goes, or the perceived betrayal goes. Because she essentially sacrificed herself for it. And that's more shitty feelings, but maybe it's a shitty feeling that makes up for the previous shitty feeling,
Yeah.
Maybe it proves to him that she was loyal to him the entire time, or even if she wasn't, it made up for the fact that she betrayed him, if that's what actually happened.
It does pose that question, and it feels like it's kind of left to interpretation to some degree right now. It's not like we have a clear answer from Kelsier. We're just being provided this information. But I agree with you. It does kind of leave us with that feeling of... especially given what we know about Mare and kind of previously, it feels like that almost like she's not like she's taking an out, but she feels like she had to make it up to him, to your point. So that hurts though. It still doesn't feel good.
Whatever the reason behind it, she sacrificed herself for Kelsier.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which could have been an absolutely worthless sacrifice, you know? Like, he would have just had to go down in the pits again, like, next week, in theory, and, like, keep digging stuff out. She didn't know that he was a Mistborn because he snaps after that, you know? Like,
right. I mean, I think
it's
that
selfless to let him live, but
I think that's the part that makes it more emotional and less utilitarian. You know, she doesn't know that he's this not quite prophetized, but clearly very important character. He's just
Did you mean prophesied?
Prophesized. That's what I meant.
Yeah, prophesied. Yeah,
not prophetized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, she didn't know that ahead of time, so that makes this sacrifice entirely emotional and not utilitarian.
Yeah.
I think that makes it a stronger case for her maybe proving to him that she wasn't actually betraying him in whatever that slight was or whatever actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes a ton of sense there, and it feels like it is, to your point, exactly trying to do that. It's exactly trying to make up for whatever it is that she actually did. Betray Kelsier. Be it her thoughts, the mind reading that we talked about previously with the Lord Ruler, or what have you. So
yeah, whatever it was.
Yeah. I love Ham's little philosophical debate that he starts here with Kelsier. And it's one that perpetuates itself. It's a conversation that we actually get to have this entire week. It's why I broke up the chapters the way that I did this week, is because this is a contained argument in its own right. And we see a lot of different perspectives here. So Ham kind of kicks it off for us thematically for the week with the question of, are noblemen any different from Ska? And this is something we're going to be talking about throughout this entire week, providing a little bit more, depth into this question. But what are kind of some of your surface thoughts, especially given just the idea of, are they any different from Ska to start with?
All right. I don't know if surface thoughts works here.
No, I mean, dig in for sure.
I think this is a really important question to bring up. And what it does for Kelsier, I think, or what it could do for him if he takes it this way, is make sure all the decisions are made without gaps in understanding. Like this allows him to think about the, worst case scenario in the idea that the noble class are actually physically and mentally different from the Ska. Like, if that's the case, he can approach it in the way that, like, I know this, but I still want to pursue this because I still think it's right. He can't get dropped. Like, there can't be dropped this bomb of information of like, oh, you're physically different people. He can still have that in his mind and still wrestle with that concept before continuing his plan,
That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't think that was Ham's intention, but I think that's an interesting perspective to look at it from.
It is almost a tangential observation. He's like, regardless of the answer to this question, this still makes sense to do because people are being treated poorly under the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, even if Ham's completely right. He's not positing anything. But even if what Ham is suggesting, the worst case scenario is that they are entirely different species. Given that context, I'm still going to do this. And I think it's important to have that knowledge and that thought process in making a big decision like that, because he can't be blindsided with it later.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is that it's one that he has to make he has to make a solid decision on, and it has to be in good faith, because otherwise everything that he's doing could be, in theory, for naught, but is it really not? Even then, I don't think so. I think he's still fighting the good fight, even if they are different species, which is the point.
Yeah. And, I mean, they're not. As far as we understand, I guess we don't technically know. Do we?
We don't have an answer to that, no. But I think that's a part of what the story wants us to question, right? And I think that is the question that we're kind of interrogating this week a little bit that we'll continue to talk about. So we'll bring this up more a little bit later, but to kick off the conversation, I find that this is an interesting, little start to the philosophical debate. Are they any different? And it's an interesting little bit. Kelsier, of course, rallies the troops together, and a part of the reason that he came up here as well was to give them a show because he's going to have to go into hiding for a bit or be a little bit more reclusive and cannot be as outspoken and things like that. So part of the reason that he's here as well is to do, one kind of hurrah. So he begins basically by hand-selecting a member of the rebellion to single out and stir and cause a bit of a ruckus with.
And so basically.
Kind of. I mean, he doesn't kill him. He should. I almost think that he should have, because the guy, regardless, believed what he was saying. And that's the interesting thing that we know about the Salamancy, is that you're really just enhancing. You're not, or you're pushing very little, and you're inflaming emotions that already exist for the most part. So it's not as though you are telepathically controlling someone to have different feelings. So you're just enhancing and building, in this case, literally rioting. So he's rioting the emotions of Bilge, and it leads to this really cool duel in which Demu is also selected as Kelsier's stand-in for the fight. What'd you think about this whole setup to the fight?
First of all, just to make my own thoughts consistent, is it Bilge or is it Bilg? Is there an E at the end?
There's not an E. I bet that was an autocorrect.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, Bilg. Or it might be pronounced Bilge. I don't know.
I think it's still Bilg.
Bilg. Anyway, it's clever, man. The way he tackles this is super clever. And it also serves as our first really in-depth look at rioting. We get that sort of symphony that we talked about a couple episodes with Breeze of soothing. And what was it? Was that an entire team that Breeze was in control of? Or was it?
Yeah, that he was signaling or before.
Yeah, because there was rioters within there too, wasn't there?
Yes, rioters and soothers.
Right. So we see that, but that's sort of a top level view. This is a really kind of different perspective on rioting that we haven't seen at all before. Mm-hmm. And that was super cool.
I think it's the first time that we've actually seen rioting specifically.
Right. Yeah. And I guess this is the sort of rare situation from Breeze's perspective where rioting is entirely different in outcome than soothing can be. He talks about how soothing and rioting can be used to obtain similar results. And I don't think you can obtain this kind of result from soothing opposite emotions. You have to elevate an emotion in order to get it to this level, as opposed to just stripping down the other, balancing emotions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, soothing everything down to get this rise out of him would be a lot harder than just rioting the emotion up. Right. To your point. Your degree of difficulty is significant between the two.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's possible.
Yeah. I'd argue it's possible, but harder. I think that's exactly why the differences exist between the metals, even though they're considered the most similar and adjacent of the metals.
Right.
Even, very similar to iron steel, but, they're almost interchangeable, but not quite. There's that little bit of nuance, and this feels like that bit of nuance.
Yeah. And so, being a Mistborn, he could also simultaneously suppress everything else. He could make it even stronger if he wanted to.
Yeah, he could definitely push this further. He could soothe and smother other emotions to really make this guy want to fuck him up. And that would be interesting. Mm-hmm. Over the next page, we get this really cool fight, though, between Demu and Bilg, in which Kelsier is very subtly controlling the fight because of the armor and gear that they're wearing. And it's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty fucking awesome. He's a tricky man. And this entire time, I was thinking about that previous question that we that we had talked about, and not explicitly because the question wasn't there yet, but I was thinking about Kelsier and leadership in general, And like this ties into that previous answer in that he is so good at rallying support and manipulating a crowd. This is his strength entirely. This kind of situation. And it is not running an empire or running a country or running an army for that matter. This kind of deal is his strength. Trickery and small time manipulations.
Yeah, he's an incredible standard bearer, but you don't want him to, be the one who sits in the chair. Yeah, it's an interesting quandary he finds himself in, especially because of how angry he gets right at the end here. As right at the end of this chapter, when he's talking with Ham, he says, "It's my army." And that's just such an interesting, little snapping moment for him.
That's something that's almost directly out of one of the passages. I can't remember which one, but it's pretty close. And that's the one where that's the exact one that I'm thinking of when I remember wanting to have thought it was Kelsier, but pivoting and thinking it was Vin instead. That was writing these passages. It was that sort of deal of my army.
Kelsier. Plots behind plots, plans beyond plans. There's always another secret. What a way to end a chapter, too, by the way. There's always another secret. Because that's kind of the way the story unfolds. It's like there's always the next thing and the next thing. It's so well done. So, kicking that off, let's move into chapter 22. We start off, of course, with the logbook, which reads, "At first, there were those who didn't think the deepness was a serious danger, at least not to them. However, it brought with it a blight that I have seen infect nearly every part of the land. Armies are useless before it. Great cities are laid low by its power. Crops fail, and the land dies. This is the thing I fight. This is the monster I must defeat. I fear that I have taken too long. Already so much destruction has occurred that I fear for mankind's survival. Is this truly the end of the world, as the many philosophers predict? What do you think?"
So this description of the deepness makes me understand the other depictions that made me question why it was so ill described. This is the whole Bigfoot is blurry thing again. It just is obscure. It is abstract. So how could you describe it?
You know what it reminds me of, specifically this passage? The smoke monster from Lost. That's a little bit more physical than this is.
Yeah.
But even that's something intangible that they don't know what to do, So
I think that I get what you're saying, and I completely understand where you're coming from. I think the problem with that was that they had no idea how to approach it, but it wasn't like it was an abstract idea that they were trying to fight. It was just not what they would technically or usually consider tangible. This is taking that to an extreme degree in that it's not contained. There's nothing physical about it, whether or not it's tangible or not. It is just basically the idea of a biblical apocalypse.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you by any stretch there. The comparison that I'm trying to compare it to a little bit is more the theory crafting side of the fandom towards the smoke monster.
Okay.
The smoke monster is this, the smoke monster is that, and sort of the assumptions. And I agree with you. This is much more of a biblical apocalypse, though. This has all of the makings of the end times ascribed to it.
Mm-hmm. There's a literal locust plague wrapped here.
Yeah, basically. Right.
I don't think even basically. I think almost explicitly.
Well, it's not called a locust plague, but it has the effect of a locust plague.
Okay.
That's what I mean. It's not, yeah. You wouldn't call it a cloud of locusts. You'd call it the fucking deepness. I don't know what else to call it.
Right. No, specifically, where is this? 363.
Yep.
Just because I was thinking about crops fail and the land dies is what I'm referring to. Was that
right.
point?
All I'm saying is a nuclear bomb can kill crops and land. It isn't explicitly a plague. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a locust plague, but it does have the impact of something like that. And it feels like it's kind of leaking across the landscape in the way that it's described, because it seems also slow and indiscriminate, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's the point, where I don't see it as... I see the crops fail thing in Landai's thing not as a, like, oh, there's a single event that destroyed everything, as opposed to a slow thing. If it was a single event, it would just say, like, everything got obliterated, including land and crops. This seems
Locust
more
plague
deliberately...
is just so
yeah,
specific.
I know I'm not...
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that it was explicitly a locust, but it was evoking that imagery for me.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. We move from there to the bit of the logbook here that Vin reads us about the Terrace Pac-Men saving up their power in bracelets. And ooh, man, did this get your mind going? I mean, we're going to talk about it more in a second, but did this little segment, what were you thinking when you stumbled across this?
I'm so excited. I'm so ready to learn more about this shit.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot more specific, like more in depth than that. Like, I want this.
Yeah, and we'll get to it at least a little bit more in a bit here, but we've got a couple more things to talk to before we get to Fuerkami. So it's exciting. I love the little note here when she's talking about reading through the journal, and she's got a lot of internal monologue about like reading and how it feels boring to her and some other things. But she comes to this conclusion that the Lord Ruler was far more whiny than any god has a right to be. And I fucking laughed out loud this time. I was like, that is the perfect joke.
That's so good.
Stacked inside of the story. Yeah.
Funny.
So perfectly funny. Very Vin. Now that she kind of is allowed, well, she feels like she's allowed to have a sense of humor and really be a person, be a character. We're starting to see these little mannerisms develop, and I think that her little witticisms are great.
Yeah.
And we move from that, of course, to the interaction with little shy Spook. And I think it's a good little interaction here wherein, you know, Dox has just come off to drop the weapons with Spook. But in addition, he gives her this little handkerchief, a really unassuming kind of thing, pink and white. And it's kind of funny because later we figure out that from Sazed that this is Spook attempting to seriously court her. And you think last week put you in your high school, junior high feels, but man, did this put me in like the sneaking a love note to someone in like that era. And I was like, holy shit, man.
God. Yeah, there are very detailed, specific feelings for me that are tied to this that hurt and that just like I cringe thinking about. And one of which I'll be vague about it, I guess, but making a mixtape style burn CD for somebody and getting completely shut down for it.
The pain! This is totally what pain feels like. Oh,
yeah,
man.
It wasn't good. I would have shut myself down if I was in that receiving situation. Like, you know, I don't blame the person in the slightest. It was,
you were just trying to show affection how you knew.
I barely knew how to do that. It wasn't good. But this brought up that feeling. So, you know, that was fun. Yeah. Our boy Spook needs to step up his game a little bit. Like, he's got some serious competition going forward. He's going to get heartbroken, and he's going to be the new big bad of the character of the book, I think. No,
you think Spook's going to be the big bad? Oh, man. Perfect.
No, but he's going to get hurt. And
he's going to be hurt so bad.
He is the embodiment of every awkward teenage boy. So the entire nation will feel bad for it, I think.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. With that, we'll move into the fun question to discuss from very sad Spook Boy to Fuerkami. And, man, obviously we're introduced to this new theory, and the way that Vin kind of pulls it out of Sazed is fun and interesting. But it's the art of the keepers. Lay on me your thoughts, your expectations, your queries, what's going through your head. Where's your brain going with this?
So I guess I'll just kind of lay out my stream of consciousness for this one.
Yeah, pop off, bro.
My initial thought here is that seems pretty straightforward. It seems intuitive. I don't really have any questions about how this works. And then I actually start fucking thinking about it. And there are so many things I'm like questioning about it. Like, what are the restrictions on like the metal alloys? Are they the same as allomancy in that you have to get a very specific alloy in order to use this? How many different attributes are available? What restrictions are a big thing. Like physically, can you have more of a, like, he has a whole bunch of bands. Is he restricted by the physical amount of a specific metal, or is it per piece? Like, what's that look like? Do they map the same as allomancers do? Like, is pewter strength for them, or is it completely different? How does knowledge work here? Is that part of this sort of school of magic, if you want to call it that? Or is that a completely different thing that are specific to keepers? Like, I don't know. There are so many things that the more I think about it, the more I want to ask. And that's not fair to you because you've read this, but maybe it's fair to you because maybe they don't ever explain it. I don't know.
I mean, I just kind of want so we obviously only get 2 metals, right, that are really kind of even remotely explained here. 3 technically that Vin kind of pulls at and hints at a little bit with kind of the glasses comment. But it is a completely new magic system, you know? And it kind of feels, to your point, like it feels like it borrows a little bit from allomancy, but it's not direct, which is interesting.
Right. What are the 3 specifically?
Well, I don't think we get the specific metals, but you can maybe assume the metals based on the abilities.
We get that he has iron bands.
Yep.
We know he has a bunch of different metal earrings. I don't remember what he has in his glasses.
So it's less that, right? The glasses aren't for storing metal.
So what's the point you're bringing up?
The insinuation with the glasses is that Sazed was storing sight, and so he had to enhance his sight with glasses.
Gotcha. Okay.
So during the period in which he was wearing... Okay, yeah.
I thought you were going the other way, like he was using the glasses as a focus.
No. I'm thinking the other way. I'm thinking, okay, so what we know is that we know that there are 3 different things that we've heard of stored before. You know, the sort of... Yep, speed, sight, and memories, knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Or the 3 that we know so far. So
was strength one, though? I feel like that might have been mentioned.
Yeah, I think it might have been mentioned as well.
Yeah, it was mentioned in a logbook.
In this section of the Lord Ruler's logbook, yeah. That Vin reads. Yep. It's mentioned that they look weak and then wake up strong.
They were storing strength and resting for an hour.
Right. Yeah, which, you know, is an interesting concept. So, you know, Fuercami seems to have some interesting and different rules. They also don't burn the metal, right? Like, that's in and of itself very different. They don't eat it. They don't burn it.
So I was trying to recall or, like, map this to D&D terms, but I was also, like, not thinking that hard on it. And I know there's a connection here, but I guess it's almost like an alchemist in that they're storing their magic in items that can be then expelled later, as opposed to like a wizard that just has a store of magic.
Right.
But there are so many exceptions to that sort of mapping that, I don't know, I might have more luck trying to map it to Diablo 3 classes, like, honestly, because of the mana system involved.
I realize that I've been saying Fuercami. It's Feruchemi. I just spelt it wrong on the sheet the one time that I put it on here.
So the interesting thing about that is the first mention of it is hyphenated across 2 different lines in the book, in our copy of it, at least. So it was hard for me to like really grasp how to pronounce it.
That makes sense. I don't know. We're going to definitely talk about this more. But following that up, Sazed also talks about both Rashek, the leader of the Lord Ruler's packmen, and the Terrace religion, of which is mentioned, being completely removed from the face of the earth and destroyed by the Lord Ruler and his actions. Why do you think the Lord Ruler would want to bury the Terrace religion that propped him up in the first place?
I think because of the connection to knowledge and history that they have. Like any sort of slight or dishonesty that got him to where he is now would be remembered, and any possibility of his secrets getting out could mean his undoing going forward. So I think that's part of it, because he calls himself a fraud in the logbook when he's talking about the sort of animosity between him and the Terrorsmen. So he calls himself a fraud, which leads me to believe that they know what he is, whatever the slight was, whatever he feigned in order to get to where he is was known by them. So he saw it as a means of protection to try to exterminate them.
Means of protection of his power.
Of himself. Yeah, his power, his position, his whatever.
Okay. All right. I just realized that this should be a prediction, so I'm making it a prediction. Look at that. Welcome.
I assumed it was.
Yeah, I didn't have it marked as such, but it should have been. So, haha! Interesting. Fun. There's also a little backstory here that Sazed pours out relating to our other characters. These folks are Vin's friends now, and I like that little revelation and realization that she hasn't even tried to talk with them or like communicate with them normally, as opposed to just survive as she does. And the fact that shocks Vin is interesting. Yeah. Any of these like small moments that are shared about the characters, these like quick sentences that you found particularly interesting?
I mean, overall, just from the perspective of Vin, it's almost charming how innocent she seemed in this moment. Like, it's not like she was intentionally shutting anyone out. It's just that she never really understood what it meant to be friends with somebody. So she was closed off by nature, both internally and externally. Like, she wasn't letting anybody in. She wasn't letting anything from herself out. Like, she was shut down. And that's slowly been eroding to the point where she's finally realizing that she has friends. And that happened basically out of proximity, not because she's been reciprocating anything. So, but
that's kind of a sad way of putting it.
But that's what it is, right?
But I don't know. I think everyone else thinks that they're friends with Vin, but Vin's realizing that like she hasn't put much in. Like they see something in her, but she hasn't realized.
What do they see? I don't know if that's true.
Well, they see a charming young girl of whom has struggled to survive and is now being introduced to the larger world. So they're placing a ton of faith in her to like work through it so that she can become, you know, a better person. They're like father figures, but like
a close friend.
I think they would, especially with the way that this section ends with kind of the drinking and hanging out.
Yeah.
It feels like they are friends.
Maybe that's fair. I don't know. I just feel like she is realizing that she's trusted, not because of merit, how do I describe this and how do I delineate between friendship and trusted coworker
being worthy? Yeah.
Like there's a line somewhere between the two, and she's somewhere around that line, and she's finally understanding that she can cross it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe that's the line that she's experiencing. I think you're right on that, Mark, that she hasn't even known what a friend really is. Like her closest thing was, you know, people in the beginning of the story of whom were still kind of mean to her. Very mean in some cases. But she is kind of in that, she feels like she's probably in that warm spot between like, oh yeah, you are a qualified compatriot, not a friend. And the other people, meanwhile, are like, oh no, we're trying to bring you in and like, we want you to understand what like normal people are like. And it's just interesting. And I guess the point is, a point of separation here too is like a thieving group is different than a typical employer, I think, because there's a natural sense of camaraderie around your like mission and goal and that kind of stuff. So
it's like faux friendship.
I don't know if this isn't.
No, but like the thieving groups that she's been a part of have been.
Oh yes, yeah, the previous ones for sure.
Yeah, this is not a typical thieving group.
Fair point. I'm thinking more the stereotypical thieving crew in fiction at large.
Gotcha.
But to your point, I guess you're right that a lot of the thieving crews have not been this way. That she's been a part of at the very least.
Right. Like the
That makes
one
sense.
person that she might have called a friend betrayed her right away in the story.
Right. Yeah. No doubt. So she then proceeds to have one of these conversations with one of the people, one of these people that she realizes that she can be friends with and start to have a deeper understanding of. She has this conversation with Doxson, and it is a sad conversation, but it really also adds to the plight of the Scott, reinforces the plight as we've come to understand them. But the story of Doxson is so intentionally similar to what we got about the story on Tresting's plantation that it almost creates this world in which, and we know this because of kind of the way the chapters start to explain this and as it's been explained to us so far, but like the occurrence that we see in the beginning is not uncommon. The experience of Doxson is not an uncommon experience on plantations, and he was treated well compared to a number of other Ska by his noble manager. It's bad. It's man. But he makes a very solid assertion about the fact that all noblemen are like that. And it feels as though there's an error of correctness, but Vin fights back on that perspective because of her experience at the balls. Where do you land in the conversation? Who do you think is kind of right?
That's an impossible question.
Really? Is it?
I think it is, because there are too many assumptions that we have to make in order to make that answer, or in order to get an answer there. Just, I guess, hear me out through all of this. I think it's hard to make an argument that they're being duplicitous in any sort of way based on like Vin's experience with them at balls and at parties and stuff, and they're seeming nice. And then Doxson is talking about how fucking evil they are and how all of them are like this, just at their core. And I think the problem is that they have been taught for generations and centuries that the Ska are not equals. They're not even necessarily the same species. Elend kind of seems to be at the cutting edge of progressive by questioning the idea that the Ska could be intelligent on like a sentient level to a certain degree. Like, if that's the belief that dominates the ruling class, the noblemen and the lords, like, I don't think we can necessarily call them morally good for mistreating the Ska, but I don't think we can really call them evil for it either.
I don't know about that. And here's the counter argument that I have. I understand exactly where we're coming from, and I think we even get some context that lends a little bit more. Obviously, the point that I really wanted to point out here is saying, like, all people is not inclusive, and that's kind of Vin's point here too, right? Like, that's almost never reality. All 100% is almost never a certain reality. It's almost never all or nothing, right? That's like one of the things that you learn as an adult is like, stop using the word all, everything, nothing, zero. Like, things don't work that way. There's always a partiality to things. So that's kind of the first non sequitur with Doxson's argument. But the other part of this that is important to acknowledge, and Ellen brings this up, is like a third of noblemen are like this. The behavior is still morally reprehensible, right? And it is a bad thing to murder someone. However, there is that interesting added layer of the Lord. So the assumption that we're making is that none of the noblemen try to communicate with Ska. We are predominantly provided, though, with Ska perspectives throughout this novel, and so we know that they're intelligent. If we were only reading it from the noblemen, maybe it might be different. But the fact that we know that they are intelligent, we can read this as readers as morally reprehensible, right? As people.
Right. No, I completely agree with that. Yes. Continue. Sorry.
Okay. So to your point, though, the noblemen are really the ones that are having trouble. Well, they aren't having trouble. They've seen it this way for centuries. And so they don't believe, there's no part of them that believes that it needs to change outside of, like you said, the cutting edge of progressive, which is someone like Elend. And that's really what might be pushing it. However, we know that they're morally bad people from the perspective of any Ska. Not unanimously, but in general. So this is the argument. This is the conversation. It's, no, you can't point and say that they're all bad because not all of them are bad. You definitely need to change the system because not all of them are good either. Matter of fact, a third of them are really bad.
Right. So you brought up, I guess my point entirely lies in one of the last things you said was from the perspective of the ska. And I agree with you entirely. Like, none of them are morally good people from the perspective of ska. But looking at it from the perspective of the noble people, if they don't have the knowledge to truly understand that they're oppressing intelligent people, and
yeah, I would argue they're not trying to understand that they're repressing intelligent people.
What materials do they really have in order to expand their understanding, though? Other than, like, actually going down and talking to all of them, like, that's obviously they could do. But,
the very basic one, which is human communication. Like,
I guess that's the thing, too. I don't think they're taught that they're the same species. So is it human communication if...
Just because you're taught something doesn't make it real, though. Doesn't make it true. You know? Like...
I agree. But if it's that ingrained, can you personally be blamed for something that is so wrongly ingrained into several generations in front of you going downward? I don't think you're right for it. I don't think you can be morally blamed for it, though.
I think you definitely can if you're a perpetrator.
I don't know about that. If you're presented with the opposition and you have the opportunity to face it and change your ways because suddenly you're presented with something different that you didn't ever have before that, and you ignore it, yeah, absolutely, you're you can be held accountable for that. But if you've never been presented with anything counter to what you've been taught, I don't know if you can morally be held accountable for upholding those values. If you don't know there's an alternative. Because as far as I can tell, most of the noble people don't actually understand that there's the possibility that the ska are being, like, that the ska are somebody intelligent that they're subjugating.
From the previous week's reading, there is a bit of conversation that happens around books, banned books, and their availability, right? The Final Empire does not ban books because that actually draws attention to them. Instead, they just let them kind of toil into obscurity because no one's seeking it. I think the information, the conversation has been there. The books that Elend is reading are old. They're old books by most standards. So I think the conversation, the knowledge has always been there. The question has always been there. But no one's taken action on it because they're in the advantageous position. Why would they question the advantage? You know, like, I guess I have a tough time with that. Clearly a bad thing, and they clearly have access to it, and they're clearly raping and murdering things that they don't believe are people, but not believing that they're people is not good.
No, it doesn't make them good. I don't think there's anything here that makes them good.
But we don't have any material differences. That's the other part of this. We don't have any material differences between the two species, in quotes.
Other than the fact that they've been taught that they're not intelligent.
Yes, they've been taught that they're not intelligent. Does not mean that we don't have... This was kind of the conversation that's had earlier, right? Is that there's no material difference between the two.
That's true. That's true.
So just because you're taught doesn't mean that you can't explore and figure it out on your own.
That's from an omniscient perspective. We know that there's no material difference, but they've never been shown that there's no material difference, right?
The ska are aware of it, and it's been written about. It was in the book. That's my point.
That's been suppressed and not distributed and intentionally not taught to people.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not as though information is freely shared, but at the same time, they don't ban books because that draws more attention to it, which is a commentary on banned books. But that's a commentary on the Lord Ruler and disseminating information. Like, the information technically exists and can be found, but I don't think you can blame somebody for not intentionally seeking out information that counters what they've been taught their entire life. Oh man, I think that should be a life goal of everyone. You should always seek out the opposite.
I agree. It should be, but I don't think you can be held to the standard of evil as if you were aware of the alternatives.
Unless you're perpetrating something that is so tough. I don't agree with that at all.
If you don't know that you can look out for something that is counter to what you believe, like, yes, it exists, but you're not aware of it, and you're not aware that you can look out for it, and you are going by what you've been taught your entire life, are you perpetrating something? Are you evil for perpetrating something that's evil? If you're not aware that it's evil.
Yeah. It's still evil whether or not you know it is.
It's evil. Are you evil? I agree.
Well, that depends on perspective.
Exactly.
Which is what... Well, I know, but what I'm saying is that we are allowed to have a perspective on this story, PJ.
Okay.
And, like, that's the important part here,
yes.
is that...
Okay.
And we also know that... So that was a very amorphous point, of which I do agree with the amorphous point that you're making. However, we know that the noblemen have access to other lanes of information. It does exist. We know that these books exist. They've gone by, they're hidden under other titles sometimes. They're less circulated. They're not reproduced often. They're everything but banning, basically. But the knowledge exists. There are a couple of noblelings that are meeting up to talk about the different books, right? Like, we've got 5 characters here that are chatting about them. And one of them calls it basically a snooze fest, says it's boring, says it's heavy. And, like, I think that shows the indifference that these people have to learning anything or trying to change their position. I think often the other part of this is that, like, when you have power, you're reluctant to give it up. That's just the nature of power. And
right,
they're third on the food chain, basically, with obligators in the way between them and the Lord Ruler. So,
yeah, I think we're basically on the same page.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're clearly delineating that just because you own slaves and you didn't know that there was an alternative, it's not a good thing. Because that's where that train of thought was going, and I was like, no, that's not.
Yes, I am with you. I agree entirely.
Because, like, them murdering people is still not a good thing from their perspective, especially since there is nothing really to delineate the quote species quote. You know, like, there's no. The only thing that they can point to between the two, seemingly, is the ability to reproduce more, which could be a thing, maybe. And even that doesn't feel really clear. It's kind of hearsay. And the elementic replication. And really, latent elementic abilities is really the only thing. And I feel like we could probably explain that as genetic fairly easily. Because it is inherited. So it feels more like a gene thing, not like a species thing. But they don't know that. They don't understand that. So that's, we can at the very least be like, yes, this is the magic beans thing. But it's good conversation. That's also why I like reading as much as I do, is because it does bring these things to the forefront. That's the reason that you read in general, is to, like, challenge your ideals, but also, like, posit other things that you might not consider.
I agree entirely.
We're going to move into chapter 23. We start, of course, with the logbook here from our Lord Ruler. I sleep but a few hours each night. We must press forward, traveling as much as we can each day. But when I finally lie down, I find sleep elusive. The same thoughts that trouble me during the day are only compounded by the stillness of night. And above it all, I hear the thumping sounds from above, the pulsings from the mountains, drawing me closer with each beat. So, thoughts? Any thoughts on the logbook here?
I mean, that just kind of feels like my sleep habits, As mentioned,
we eventually need to get the Lord Ruler's perspective in pooping habits and kind of his wake-up habits. We're getting his sleep routine now. We need the alarm clock going off.
Exactly.
Routine.
No, yeah, I know how much it sucks to not be able to sleep at night. I know you do, too.
Right. We were both terrible insomniacs, which is... I've just turned into workaholism, so that's fine.
And alcoholism.
I mean, only on recording days. So
yeah, that's not a slight on alcoholics. I don't have a backup way of getting myself out of
You don't have a way
this.
out of that one. No worries. I'll get you out of stepping in that ship. This is like a traversing kind of chapter, right? Like, this is or traversing like logbook entry here. There's not like a ton of meat to this or anything, but it does give us a sense of that pulsing sound again, that the pulse in the distance of this thing in the mountains, in the terrace mountains that they're kind of chasing after. And, you know, we then cut to a ball. I think this is the House Hastings ball, as it had been discussed. I'm not 100% sure if that's even clarified.
It sounds right.
It was like the next big ball was supposed to be the House Hastings ball, and I assume that was this one. But there's been some time passage again here, some time slippage. So it's
that's
not 100%
a good point.
clear. So there might have been a minor. This might be a more minor ball, but it feels like it's a bigger ball. So unclear. Anyway, and it has kind of been discussed here among a variety of different characters that we get at the ball that the seeds of discord have been planted firmly among the noble houses, and Vin just kind of gets to witness it and thinks that Kelsier would be very proud of the work that he's done here.
Yeah, it's really kind of satisfying seeing all of that conversation play out after Kelsier's like careful puppet mastery from last week. It's a lot of fun to see it from this perspective of the sort of gossip from the other side.
Yeah, to see that gossip and to kind of get that perspective, it's really interesting, you know, and I think that this is such a clever way of weaving in this part of the heist, as it were, right? To have this additional like lens to see the results of these actions. So yeah. We also see an obligator up close and personal this week, as close as we've really gotten to one since the very beginning of the book, witnessing something as simple as a promise to attend a sporting game with other houses. I think it's interesting that they're effectively like certifying it under God that they're going to do this, as though this religion is much less religious from our understanding and more like bureaucracy.
Yeah, okay, so I think we can kind of flip this a little bit. Especially with this being a theocracy, as we know, we can say the same. We can get the same result by saying that the business is less bureaucratic and more religious.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like it just depends on how you kind of frame your point of view between religion and business in this society, I guess. But I think you get the same result either way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's actually almost a better way of putting it, because it makes it a little bit more clear that despite religion, like business has infected feels wrong, but it is inside of the religion. It has made its way into the religion and is another angle in which the Lord Ruler has control, basically through the economy, and like basically has a legion of lawyers, kind of, which is fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. It's a weird cross between priests and lawyers that these obligators are.
Yeah, right?
No,
like marriage,
like
divorce.
Notary priests.
Yeah, right. Which is wild. Very odd, but like it makes sense inside of the world. Like it's so strange. It is bizarre how so much of this just makes perfect sense and fits so well together. Like perfect puzzle pieces. We get a really kind of vile perspective here from the other noblemen and women who reflect on their kind of disgusted nature of the Scott thieving crews, not realizing that there's this one right under their noses, Vin being right there. And I guess it just goes to kind of show that separation of classes is far greater than Vin thought.
Are these people evil? Are they evil people? They're doing evil things, but does that extend to their core? Like, are they at their core evil people because of what they're doing, if their intentions aren't?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question.
Right.
But then we get to a conversation with Lady Shan, where she seems to recruit Vin, believing her soothing would be enough to push her into service. But more importantly, there's the question of what Shan knows about those texts of Ellen's and what she plans on doing with that information. What do you think?
Shan is so slippery compared to a lot of the other noble ladies. I can't help but think there's some sort of trap for our dear Vin here. Like, for example, if Shan already knows exactly what's in these books, this is a setup to basically test Vin to give her the correct information of what's in these books. Or if she knows vaguely what's in these books, it could still be a trap in that she's getting Vin to give more specific information. And if she says, oh, it was nothing suspicious, it was completely innocuous, that's still like a failure in that sort of test. So I'm not trusting of Lady Shan in general.
Yeah, I mean, she's definitely done nothing to like provide trust in any context, you know, like she's not done anything to give us a reason to believe her or trust her. She's definitely been nothing but sketchy, and she's pushing actively on Vin's emotions. So it seems very clear that she's, at the very least, she thinks that she can be both like emotionally abusive and manipulative in this situation. And
right.
Yeah. It's just, you know, she's very aware of what's in Ellen's books, or at the very least aware of what they could be. And as such is using basically Vin to kind of burn her, you know, potentially, I should say, to burn her in case she's discovered doing this and going through, you know, that way she can be held accountable and Shan can't, you know, kind of like a pawn in any sort of scheme. And the whole thing has this like air of badness around it. It's not going to be a good time. Shan Alariel, not a good lady. Not so
at all.
Your prediction here is that basically, if we're to put a prediction on this, is that Shan does know what those texts are and is going to use this as a sort of purity test for Vin.
Yeah, either I think there are two sort of grades to that, but I think both of them can boil down to that prediction. She is either explicitly aware of exactly what's on those pages and is waiting for Vin to tell her exactly what she already knows, or knows that they're vaguely suspicious and banned to a certain extent, but doesn't know exactly what's on the pages, and it is waiting for Vin to confirm that. So,
yeah,
either way, she knows of transgressions from her perspective and is waiting for Vin to confirm them.
Waiting for that nail in the coffin of sorts. Absolutely. Yeah. Of course, she does go to meet and chat with Ellen, and he's nothing if not a gentleman. You know, he's obviously kind of encouraged by Shan to go, you know, find the books and whatnot. But she decides to go and meet and chat with Ellen, and he's nothing if not a gentleman this time around. He explains that he did sleep with a Ska woman, but that his father had forced him to become a man. And wow, what an awful fucking ritual that must be like for him to have experienced. Yes, sleep with this person and then we'll murder them. That won't scar you for life at all. Not at all. Not whatsoever.
Yeah, that's super fucked. It's so fucked.
Yeah, it's definitely no bueno. It sucks because it makes it feel like it's this rite of passage and that there's a degree of truth to what like Doxson and Kelsier are saying, that like they're all bad, but it's like, no, they aren't all bad. And that's the argument that Vin is arguing, is there are shades of gray here that we need to consider versus just killing them all, versus just fighting against them all.
Right.
So it's an interesting little sticking point. The honest conversation between Ellen and Vin around the Ska is, I think, like a relatively revelatory one. Ellen seems to lack faith in the Lord Ruler's teaching, as he's hinted at before, but he has almost a curious, like, sympathetic tone to him as well, as he's talking about the Ska.
Maybe this is another drink for me. I don't know. I don't think there's anything confirmed here, but I was pretty adamant that he was lying about his feelings. So I'll take it. I'll take a drink here. I'm pretty confident in his actual not necessarily compassion. I don't think that's necessary. Like, that might be true, but sympathy. I think sympathy is the right term.
Yeah, I would say I feel like sympathy is definitely closer to it, for sure. That makes
compassion
sense to me.
might exist, but that's not what I'm looking for.
Right. It's, you know, and that's definitely not exactly what's highlighted in this moment. So the handkerchief flirt of Ellen is pretty good, though, and brings kind of a smile to my face as he's making that comment about, oh, no, you keep it. And it's just great for Vin because she deserves a little something of her own, you know? Like, she's been through so much. And I really love the little line that's delivered here after they kind of have this split. Is that another handkerchief mistress? My, you've been busy. And it's like a perfect C-3PO joke, and I love Sazed for that. I can't get it out of my head.
It's either weird that you said that or entirely not weird that you said that, and I'm not sure which it is yet. I had almost the exact same thought regarding this being like a C-3PO joke. Was this an actual reference that I like subconsciously glazed over, or was this entirely coincidental that we both came across that sort of connection?
I think it's coincidental.
Okay.
It's one of those things. So it's not a direct reference. It's not a very clear like C-3PO said something adjacent to this. It feels very coincidental, but what's very interesting thinking about characters and writing characters, often you'll like give characters dialogue rules so that they speak specific ways. And often Sazed doesn't use a whole lot of contractions. As you start to read, as you like read his writing, he very infrequently will ever use a contraction. So he does deliver almost a little bit more robotically because of that.
Okay.
And that makes him gives him a very interesting voice and perspective. And it feels similar to C-3PO in the way that it's so formal, I think. And is kind of like
with a touch of comedy once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh dear. Like you can imagine the same kind of thing coming out of Sazed's mouth, right? Yeah. So it definitely gives it that flavor. I totally understand where you're coming from.
Well,
what'd you think
because you mentioned C-3PO.
Well, that's true. That's true. What'd you think of Ellen giving the handkerchief though? The sort of formal.
I thought it was like that was bound to happen, given the way that this is going forward. And I still don't necessarily. I am finding myself more and more trusting Lord Venture. My eyes are like behind my head right now. Like I'm
half rolled back,
heavily rolling my eyes. But I'm not entirely trusting him, but I am more and more coming to like take his actions at face value. And with that context, it makes total sense that he'd actually do something grandiose like that, if we're going to call that grandiose.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
I still don't fucking trust him. But
you don't trust anyone. Which, I mean, fair enough. Vin finally gets an excuse here to finally use her elementic powers again and follows Ellen up to his meeting with his friends in the tower, meeting with Teldin and Jostes and a fifth voice that I don't think is ever given a name in addition to... It's Ellen, Teldin, Jostes. When I was reading the scene, I was trying to figure out who the fuck the fourth voice was.
There's
and
5.
Then the mysterious... Right, because there's the mysterious fifth voice that is not given a name. But they're like, who the fuck was the other person's name? I tried so hard rereading it so many times.
Yeah,
trying to work that shit out. Jostes, Ellen Teldin. Red of Villain's work is better, but that's actually one of the writers. Ellen... Fifth voice. Yeah, see, that's the problem, is that it's just like fifth voice. What the fuck is fifth voice? Unless it's talking, like, it's considering the guards, I guess, as 2 of the... No, because that would put us up to 6 voices. Anyway, I quit.
The guards are clones, and they have the same
guards
voice.
could be a guard talking to himself.
Pretending
arguing with
to be
himself
2
about
guards.
his shift. Yes. Oh, can you believe that they're having us work double shift tonight? I know. I don't even think that they're going to need us. I hear that they're sending all the people out from the garrison. I know. I heard that too. Weird. It's like we share a brain.
We're cutting costs. All of your partnerships will become single people, but I will urge you to speak as if you're both parties to keep up the audible appearances that we've still got the same amount of people on staff. I hope you understand.
So they're debating the reading of the week, kind of like we have been, when Kelsier shows up saying he's been following them as well. Of course, he doesn't actually show up in the room, but he's talking with kind of Vin outside. They agree to meet up back up at Clubs' shop, and that's where this chapter kind of ends. It's just quick. It's kind of a quick, abrupt ending.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun having Kelsier kind of interrupt Vin from the rooftop.
Yeah. It's like, oh shit, I'm caught. But it's like, nah, it's not that big of a deal.
She almost falls off, right?
Yes, I think so. I think
startles
she jumps
are
back.
pretty something fierce.
Yeah. Yeah, she definitely has to adjust. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting way to end it, especially considering we knew how far away he and Clubs were previously. And so this is a great way to communicate that, they're back in town and that, the time has passed effectively. So with that, we move into our final chapter of the week, chapter 24. The logbook starts with, "In the end, I must trust in myself. I've seen men who have beaten from themselves the ability to recognize truth and goodness, and I do not think I am one of them. I can still see the tears in a young child's eyes and feel pain at his suffering. If I ever lose this, then I will know that I've passed beyond hope of redemption." I think that this is interesting, especially considering it feels like the Lord Ruler has specifically lost this.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of a lot of these passages are from pre-ascension, and they're clearly a very driven person, but there are some that are not, and they delve into a little bit of crazy, a little bit of just manic writing, and it's concerning but interesting to read,
Yeah, this is him trying to steady himself, to your point of like the manic writing versus the non-manic writing. This one isn't, I wouldn't call it overtly manic. This is him trying to steady himself and trying to point out to being able to rely on himself and sort of his good moral code, and if he ever loses that, he will have passed beyond redemption. So it's interesting. We proceed from that very deep, reflective chapter on reliability and goodness into a really fun, happy chapter. I love this chapter a lot. It's got a nice, warm, kind of homely feeling to it. It's humorous. The gang is all together again. There's drinking again, having a good time. It feels very optimistic, and I don't know. I love it. Any favorite jokes? I particularly like Ham's about the vest and like tearing off the sleeves.
Yeah, I guess mine kind of plays off of that. I think it's like right after that comment when Kelsier asks for a few physical representations of the concept of effort to pay for a warehouse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. Him like specifying the form of money. Money is just like effort verified, and it's like, Jesus Christ. It is that exchange. Fucking love Ham, right? But that joke is like the personification of if I were a really big philosophy nerd and like everything was like that. Like I feel like Ham is a cartoonish rendition of myself in that way, if that makes sense.
I feel like that argument from Ham makes the most sense in contemporary U.S. now, where paper money isn't actually based in anything.
Well, it was always an exchange. It was always an exchange of labor. So, like, it all...
But it was also based in something physical, as opposed to an amorphous representation of something that no physical anything could... It wasn't rooted in anything other than word.
It was still rooted in word often. I mean, the point being is like you didn't carry around the gold coins for your dollar. No one did that. It was a promissory note. All money is a promissory note for gold to be exchanged, which is a token of labor. Like it ultimately, I think the joke still stands regardless of...
It does. That's true.
Of being attached to a currency. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's good. How do you feel? I mean, do you like this chapter? Also, we should drink because it's a chapter where there's a shit ton of drinking.
Yeah, we should. Cheers.
Cheers. This has like a lot of revelry in it, which I think is great. I think that I really also enjoy the slang exchange that we get between Kelsier and Spook as well. I think it's referred to as like an Eastern dialect, if I can't remember properly, but I think it's an Eastern dialect. As though he'd kind of pick it up, as though Kelsier had picked it up after like, saying like his name wasn't catchy and everything else, just to make Spook feel more comfortable with everyone, as well as like how easily Ham slips into it, and even like Breeze gives it a shot. It's such a nice, lighthearted moment, especially for something that could be viewed as really confusing.
Well, it was confusing. Do we know if Kelsier is actually able to pick it up? Like, we know later on that Dachshund is just kind of spewing nonsense, and they call him out for it. But do we know if anybody else was actually saying anything
So here's an interesting thing that I did this week, and I wasn't originally going to do this, but I decided that I wanted to kind of supplement. There are annotations that are not spoiler forward on this book and this series as a whole. The entire Mistborn series there are annotations for, and there are chapter by chapter annotations. So I found the one that relates to this chapter, and Brandon actually has a translated version of the conversation between him and Kelsier. Yeah. And Kelsier does understand. It is completely intended that he understands.
Okay. Gotcha.
So
good to know.
Breeze definitely doesn't. That's the point of that. And Ham obviously also kind of latches into it properly, but because he gets kind of, nod response and they're having a three-way conversation. But
was I right?
Doxson
being the one that doesn't?
Yes, Doxson is the one who tries to speak it but doesn't understand.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. That's Doxson.
Gotcha.
So yes, he's just making it up, which even like Spook remarks in regular tongue, which is really funny, kind of like to punchline the whole joke. He speaks his best common, we'll call it. But yeah, it's just a fun little exchange. So I think that this is such a great chapter as well, because it also shows how Vin has really changed. Again, the last time that she was in the shop, she was skeptical and a massively different person, like listening through the door, wasn't the knowing of this is the present, and, capiche, ever wasn't the wish of the having the have to have,
Yeah.
Yep. Having the have, knowing of this.
We're talking about Vin, right?
Yep. Yeah, Vin's growth in this place.
Okay. I think what was the coolest part about that was that Vin herself realizes that she's grown here. She acknowledges her own progression through this team. And she points out that she still hears Reen sometimes and uses that as an anchor to be an outsider. But we know for a fact that everybody has some sort of baggage. And this is just kind of her doing what she can to not fall into too much comfort with this group. When, as far as we can all tell, she's kind of completely integrated into it.
It is so great that she has integrated into that to this point. Like, it is just kind of a wonderful moment for her to, show this progression, to kind of embody it, and to maybe not fully recognize, but at least reckon with it, So that's interesting. I think Breeze's trepidation here of being handed the reins of the army to be an interesting and fair one on his part. He's never done anything like this. What do you make of his thought of giving Kelsier's thought of giving Breeze a turn at general?
I think from an ability perspective, this makes total sense. But like from a personality perspective, he's going to be the general that like gets his own giant tent and somehow has an air conditioner as they march across the fucking countryside. Like, I think he will be effective. I don't think he'll be a good leader.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. It's an interesting point. It's kind of like the sort of, I love the tent idea, but I think that the air conditioning, it's kind of not a mirrored inverse, but it feels similar to your read and judgment on Kelsier being the like leader post-rebellion. There's this, obviously there's the air of the air conditioning and the prim and proper man in charge of the, that shouldn't be in charge of the army being in charge of the army. But at the same time, it feels as though your other judgment outside of that is, similarly mismatched for the job, as Kelsier would be mismatched to be the man in the regal chair. Yeah. Although I would argue Kelsier is probably better in the regal chair than Breeze is, maybe as a general. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, probably.
All right. Fair enough. Just curious. It's one of those things. Ham brings up that most of the crew are concerned about Kelsier and the 11th Metal, as well as the power that he's amassed through, kind of the recruitment, through a number of different components here. They think that it's gotten to his head that he has become this sort of holy man. And I don't know, what's your take on it? What are your thoughts on Ham bringing this up?
I don't think that's entirely inaccurate. I think taking it to the level of holy extreme, but he definitely has a sense of self-importance, and he needs to. He has to have that sense of self-importance in order to, like, first, gain recruits, and second, inspire some sort of confidence in the recruits that he has already gained. Like, there needs to be that arrogance, for lack of a better term, in order to maintain that level of clout. So,
sure. No, I think that's definitely true. I think that there is, interestingly enough, when it comes to someone who embodies that sort of leadership persona, I think you put it well, there is that level of arrogance that's necessary in order to, maintain, to hold the, again, I keep using the word reins inside this episode, but to really like take hold of that and make sure that they're steering, the conversation in whatever way is necessary towards the end goal that, they're seeking, which in this case is the destruction of the final empire. So maybe some of it is going to Kelsier's head, but I'm not sure it is to the degree that they're suggesting. Yeah, I'd agree with that assumption. So Ham and Vin head out to the garrison, and I think that this is kind of a great lesson in the power of Pewter. We kind of get a little bit of what Pewter can be or could be. We don't necessarily see it strictly in use, but we get a lot of conversation around what it could be, including an explanation of an effect that we haven't heard before called Pewter Dragging, which is using pewter for an extended period of time and the impact that it has on the body, the wear that it puts on the body.
Right. This is the kind of information that Vin desperately needs. This is more in-depth training on each metal, like we've talked about from the beginning. And it is fucking insane to me that Kelsier doesn't seem to put that much importance on these kind of lessons. Like, he seems uncharacteristically like an old curmudgeon about these lessons, based on what we've seen from it about it. Like, this is a necessity because he's busy, but he should be able to give her all she needs. And I don't know if it's because he wants to be good enough to just train her in everything, or if he assumes that Mistborn in general can't be so naturally and granularly in tune with specific metals that these in-depth lessons with specific mistings are useful at all. I don't know. I'd like to learn, though.
It feels like it is the latter, right? Where he believes that they're going to be able to train better. Another thing that I would just throw back and add into the conversation is Kelsier is relatively new to his Mistborn capabilities, his Mistborn abilities. He's been gone for 3 years, I think, from the last time that they saw him until he re-arrives in Luthadel. And we're 6 months, I think, right now past that point, and past the point of the beginning of the story, basically. But most of these mistings have had their powers most of their entire lives. And so they have a deeper understanding, not only because it's their only metal, but because they've been using it longer.
Right.
So I think there's an interesting combination of knowledge there. So I think, arguably, both of your answers are correct. He doesn't have the time, and this is something that's been specified as to why he did it in the first place, is he doesn't have the time to put in. And maybe that's, again, a portion of arrogance and whatnot. But on top of that, I think that he's made aware of an obvious benefit from training from everyone individually. And, it's great for us as benefactors of this information, receiving it through these different, lens of seeing the training through different people. But it also feels like it's making Vin just a strictly better Mistborn than Kelsier is. And the Kelsier chapters are slowly dwindling as we've been moving through the book as well. Like, we're getting less Kelsier and more Vin,
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely
as
true.
we progress as well. Yeah. I think you've got a great read on that, a great dial-in of man, it feels like Kelsier is almost missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Yeah. He's on the wrong side of a cat.
Mm-hmm.
Our chapter ends Our chapter ends with a surprise as Ham approaches the garrison men. The rebellion has attacked, and the Koloss are not going to be able to make it in time to save those garrison men that are north near where the caves are. So the garrison men from the city of Luthadel are going to be forced to head out to support that smaller northern garrison. Of course, Ham and Vin act shocked for obvious reasons, but more importantly, they're shocked that this attack happened in the first place. This is not a part of the plan. What will the consequences of Yin's action here be? And I've flagged this, just this last part, as a prediction.
I assume that the crew will infiltrate the garrison. Kelsier and Vin will probably scout ahead, trying to do what they can to assist the rebellion before this local garrison gets there. If this was an intentional attack by Eden, I think he will be sort of verbally dressed down and completely replaced as leader.
Okay.
It's kind of what I've got.
All right. What do you think about, and this isn't a part of the prediction, but what do you think about this entire, like what's going on here in general? Like, this is a crazy, totally against the plan. Why do you think he decided to do this?
I don't know, man. I'm thinking it was accidental. They got caught out or something. Like, this was, like, they were strategically moving their army elsewhere and got caught.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So they got caught, basically. All right. Cool.
This wasn't like
and again,
an offensive. This was a accidental defensive.
Which is interesting because we know that it's hard to get the men out of the caves because they have to crawl through the 3 different entrances and whatnot. And like, that's a whole...
You know, you say that, and now I remember that fact, and I'm not changing my fucking guess.
Okay. I was just saying it feels like it would be intentional defense potentially because they were found out. I'm not trying to assuade your...
No, I can get behind that. I just think maybe it was a more advantageous position to be set up somewhere else. So like, all right, quickly, let's go over there.
Sure. Okay. All right. We end this week's reading with a short Lord Ruler passage from the logbook. No man dies by my hand or command, except that I wish there had been another way. Still, I kill them. Sometimes I wish that I weren't such a cursed realist.
Yeah, so this starts to feel different from the previous writers of these passages. This feels odd. I don't know.
Okay. Just odd?
Not in line with what we heard from the Lord Ruler beforehand. It feels darker, less driven and more defensive of actions, I guess.
It does feel very defensive. I would definitely agree with that. This has a tone that is shockingly different. I think it's not completely different. There are moments in the passage that have kind of similar moments of sort of direct, that are directly communicating something like this is, but this is definitely the most brutal of these kind of sections. I don't think he's talked a whole lot about killing people and aggressive things of that nature previously, so
I don't think so either.
Cool. So with that is this week's reading. Do you have anything else that you want to bring up regarding this section that you don't think we hit?
You know what? No, I feel like we hit basically everything.
We've got PJ's predictions up next. I'm just going to real quickly buzz through these again, kind of like we have previously. I'm not going to read the whole questions, but we have the first question about, do you think Kelsier is a good choice for ruler? What do you make of the conversation? Effectively just talking about, is Kelsier a good choice? Your conversation that we've been having around this the whole time is, he's not a great pick for leader. He's much better at being the leader of a rebellion than he would be the leader of a society. So comparing those two, it's a great little pull out there. We've then got Sazed talking about Rashek, the leader of the Lord Ruler's packmen and of the Terrace religion. Why do you think the Lord Ruler would want to bury the Terrace religion that propped him up in the first place? And your response was effectively that he's burying this very intentionally to prevent people from tracking him or like finding out any of the secrets that could be his undoing. Is that accurate?
Yep, basically.
Cool. We then get the conversation with Lady Shan about recruiting Vin and trying to get her to pull from the text of Elend. You said effectively that Shan is a lot more slippery. Jesus Christ. Slipperier. She's more slippery than other noble ladies. And slipperier, the worst. So she's more slippery than other noble ladies. And she
all right, give up on the word. Fine.
Is really going to be testing Vin's alignment. And that's really kind of what she's aiming for. Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what will the consequence of Yin's actions here be? The last one that we just covered about sort of him losing his place as the leader if he led the attack. Otherwise, the sort of Kelsier Vin needing to scout ahead and trying to do what they can to assist the rebellion. Sort of your call out. Does that sound good? Cool. All right. Question of the week. This week's question is favorite close call. So this one is kind of an interesting one because it's kind of left open-ended. And yeah, I guess we'll just probably switch every other here. But it's kind of open-ended because your definition of a close call might be different than others. So we're just going to bounce off these and then we'll run with ours at the end. Cool. All right, so Storms from our Discord. This might go a smidge past a close call, but the ending of Gideon the Ninth. Skip forward 30 seconds if you don't want to hear about the ending of Gideon the Ninth, of which is... I will say Storms did a good job of de-spoilering this as much as possible. So this is well done. In the final fight, it really seemed like everyone might actually die. A lot of supporting characters die throughout this book, too. Instead, one main character dies in a sense, but their consciousness is still available and the bad guy is defeated. So at the end of the day, the parts of the characters I care about are still there. So I guess it's a happy ending, ? So this is really interesting because I think it both isn't a close call because it was kind of fun, but they're alive still or like accessible, I guess, which is interesting. So yeah, I don't know. That sounds interesting. Gideon the Ninth is on my short list of very soon reads. I've heard enough about it and it's been ranted enough about and Pierre has that I read it. So it's a necessary thing at this point. So, all right.
So from Artificer. In The Walking Dead, when Glenn falls off the dumpster into a swarm of zombies in season 6, episode 3. I don't think I can speak to that.
That was the last season that I watched.
Sounds terrifying.
That was the last season that I watched, of which this moment was very misleading. Like this season was billed as losing a major character. Like a major character was going to die. And this happened in season 6, episode 3, like the third episode in. And you're like, fuck, it's going to be Glenn. Fuck, it's going to be Glenn. And this felt like it's a close call because Glenn lives. So it just felt like the whole season was just playing up. Well, who are we going to lose? Who's going to die? We don't know. And it was a moment for sure. How much of The Walking Dead did you watch? The first 2 seasons?
2, I think.
Yeah, I feel like that's right. Yeah. Cool. All right. From Cephandrius the Howler. My favorite close call in recent memory takes place in episode 3 of Midnight Mass. Don't want to spoil anything if you haven't seen it, but I assume Crossland knows what I'm talking about. I definitely do, and I am such a fan of this that there isn't any way that I will touch what you've suggested in this context. I love episode 3 is one of my favorite episodes of TV ever. I think it is brilliantly plotted and absolutely wonderful. There's a dream of someday doing a podcast of this in some capacity for coverage. So I love Midnight Mass. Yeah. Anyway, great one. Yeah. Good one, Cephandrius.
Full show. Lex Miraglia 10, when Rick, Carl, Daryl were in shit spot, and then Rick bites the guy's ear off and goes berserk. Or soon after the cannibal place when about to get beheaded and Carol blows the place up. Or I was definitely worried about Tyrion after Oberyn blew the fight versus Mountain, or a Words of Radiance spoiler that neither of us are going to read, or Victra end of Golden Sun, Severo in Morningstar, Mustang in Dark Age. All definitely had me for a bit. And there were definitely times in Dark Age when I was worried about Severo and Darrow too. That's a whole lot of them.
All. I was like, this is such a good list.
now mine are gone. So,
You're just going to have to think about another one before we get to the end here. So let the record show.
Also, I apologize. I am so bad at reading out loud. Like, I'm not good at it.
It is fair. So there's the word of Radiant spoiler was one that was properly spoiler tagged inside of the Discord, so I didn't read it. But I have yet to read, I think we've talked about this before, I've yet to read the Stormlight Archive. It is very quickly approaching my I must read this because of reasons. But so it's approaching the must read pile of books for me, and so I didn't want to read it, and so I put just a Words of Radiance spoiler that we are definitely not reading. Words of Radiance is a book by Brandon Sanderson inside of the Cosmere, so that is why. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did not.
Well, now you do. So with that, we go to Tim Pierce. Well, I was going to say T. Pearso, but here I am. Tim Pearson. Man, I'll start with all the bullets missing Jules and Vincent in Pulp Fiction. It essentially changes Jules' path, whereas Vincent continues down it and gets shot to death by Butch. Carl from Die Hard, the bad guy with blonde hair, gets a chain wrapped around his neck by McClane, and he's left there hanging to death. Carl shows up after you think the action is done, and Powell saves John and Holly's lives. Same sort of character trope in Lethal Weapon, where Murtaugh saves Riggs from Gary Busey's character. Love all of those. Love the call out of all of the classic action movies here. It's a great move. Good call. Those are all great close saves. And pretty much a lot of action movies are often determined by close calls. Like, that is the tension that they're building a lot of times, is those narrow escapes.
For sure. We've got Ivana, Sherlock when he jumps off the building. There's a couple of Greenbone saga that she mentioned as well, but we skip past those for the time being. The smiley face. Yeah.
There's a couple with Ivana that she had originally sent in. Greenbone saga has a number of great close calls that I want to acknowledge here at the very least, as she had mentioned. So, but because she knows that we've been such hardcore advocates, and because we have a couple of people in our Discord reading through the series now, she didn't want to spoil it for anyone. So,
Team No Hype.
Team No Hype. All right, PJ, do you have yours? Do you know what yours is? Or are you going to think about it?
Well, mine was Victra at the end of Golden Sun.
That's a great one. But
that was in the list of like fucking 20 that Lex put in. So I don't know. Like, I'm going to steal it. That one's mine because that's one of the ones that truly got me.
Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Can we even say that? Fucking read Red Rising if you're at this point.
If you were unaware. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of I'm going to pick something that's not Red Rising. My favorite close call is the very beginning of the First Law trilogy. Begins with Logan Ninefingers having a close call, and it is brilliant. It is literally within the first 2 pages, and it made me immediately fall in love with the character, and I'm still reading First Law books. Like, I love everything that the man has put out. I am just now finishing Red Country. I've got less than 20 pages left in that sucker, and then I'm done with it. And I'm going to take a brief break from First Law, then I'm going to go into Age of Madness, because I haven't read any of those yet, and I'm very excited. Anyway, yeah, that's mine. So, very good. So, for next week's question, I was thinking, since we spent so little time talking about this in today's episode, I wanted to maybe posit that what's your favorite moral debate that's brought up in a book or series or piece of art?
Yeah.
What's your favorite moral debate?
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We're not here, we aren't going to be litigating your individual opinions on these things, but feel free to share one of those interrogations. It's always interesting, and the purpose of writing is often to interrogate ignorance. So, yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Should we say present the question, not any sort of argument?
Yeah, present the question and or the argument. So, like, a book might pose a question. Sometimes a book might make an argument, though. You know what I mean? Like, it might not pose a question. It might make the argument for something.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, keep it simple. Keep it punchy. Let's put it that way. It doesn't need to be the full,
punchy moral arguments.
Not like fighty, but it's punchy, It's different. More different.
Right, yeah.
All right. With that, next week we are going to be reading chapters 25 through 28. I think we're down to like 60 Or no, sorry, this is another 70-page week, but we're in the final third of the book, PJ. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, it went so fast. No joke. So chapters 25 through 28. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, of course, Andrew and Tim. Switch your names up this time. You're welcome, Andrew. Sorry, Tim. For helping us keep our show's lights on. Check out our show notes. They have links to basically anything that you want from us, be it websites, social media accounts, previous episodes, our Patreon, fucking everything. It's all in one very convenient location.
Yes, it is. And you can find literally everything. You can find us on, you can find all of our links to our various socials. To recount those to you, Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter and Instagram, Words and Whiskey Pod on Reddit, because I'm a bastard, Words and Whiskey Show at gmail.com, and patreon.com/Words and Whiskey. All of these links are available in our show notes, as PJ stated, as well as on our website at wordsandwhiskey.show/links. Beyond that, Spotify just added a new review function, of which I can't claim to know how important it is yet, but I assume it will be very important, the way that Spotify recommends shows inside of their algorithm. Feel free to leave us a 5-star review in any other show that you support, especially since it's a brand new system. It's only available on mobile right now. And for any show that you support and listen to through Spotify, make sure that you leave them that review, because I'm sure in the future it will be great and impactful. It's our day one of realizing that this was available, and we're at, I think, 17 reviews, which is great and fantastic and awesome, and very appreciative for everyone getting behind that so quickly. Like, didn't even realize that it was a thing, and all of a sudden mentioned it, and, you know, it changed. So you can absolutely make an impact, and this is much easier to leave a review through Spotify than it is Apple. Apple has all kinds of fucking steps that you have to go through. This is 1-2 click, but Apple still is the Lord ruler of reviews, so leave us one there too. So with that, if you haven't already entered into our Instagram giveaway, make sure that you do that on Instagram. Check it out. It's the giant giveaway post with the fun leather-bound version of Mistborn on it. Go check it out. Beyond that, thank you guys so much for listening and for all the support. See you next week. 3, 2, 1...